Hello out there in Guitar Moderne land. It's been a while, about 3 months to be exact. A lot has happened in the interim. My wife and I moved to France. This is our temporary home in Nepheus. Also, I managed to fall down and break my femur, and which has been fixed, and I'm hobbling around nicely. Thank you. To get back into the swing of things, I decided to interview Jonathan Crossley again. I spoke to Jonathan Crossley about a year ago, at which time I described him as a poster boy for modern guitar, as he has experimented with haptic suits to control the guitar and is currently extensively using a laptop and software in both recording and performance to introduce aleatory elements and generally push the guitar forward, which is what we like here at Guitar Moderne. I suggest you check out that original interview because it was great, and I don't think enough people saw it. Um, and the new interview was also terrific. He is now teaching at Liverpool, at a university at Liverpool. And we talked about a wide range of subjects involving modern guitar and the direction it's going and what to do with it and all the stuff that you guys like. So, in addition, please go to the website and click through to my sponsors, Red Panda and Source Audio. They make great pedals for modern guitarists. And please check out both interviews with Jonathan Crossley. His new record, Inhale, is absolutely worth checking out. Every place you check out recordings. And sit back and enjoy my interview with Jonathan Crossley. Okay. Um, because yeah, I want this is all stuff that I wanted to discuss with you in a lot of ways. For one thing, I was going to ask you, when we spoke last time, you were in Nottingham. You had relocated from South Africa,
Yeah.
and now or are you in Nottingham now? No, that was then. And now where are you now? And how did you get there?
Yeah, no, no. Um, the way it worked out is I was still working for Wits University in Johannesburg remotely when we last spoke, and I landed a position at a university here. It was okay, and then I landed this dream job, which is at the University of Liverpool. Um, and so that was the second position after we spoke. So I work for Liverpool and I work in Liverpool, but we still stayed in Nottingham, so we're basically in the same place.
Okay.
So I've got a 3 hour commute that I do once a week and stay over there, So I spend some time weekly in Liverpool, but my kids are at a great school here. There's a great music center, particularly where my sons go to school. And my oldest son, he's 13, but he's doing grade 7 classical. He's got the bug, and they have this great music center who plays and chamber work and ensemble works and stuff. So it's worth staying here for them and doing a horrible commute.
Right. Well, I find that's not unusual with people who teach in university or colleges. I mean, I knew a lot of musicians who taught at Berkeley, in Massachusetts, but lived in New York, and they would, because they were established in New York, so they would go up. That's 5 hours from
Wow.
New York to Boston, but they would go up, whatever they'd arrange their schedule, so they'd have a place to stay up there and go up for however long it took, and then come back, and it works out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the staff actually, ironically, the staff are quite varied. Um, um, in not only in nationality at this university is quite interesting, but also in the styles or the focal areas, quite wide. But a lot of them commute. I'm not the only one, so it seems to be quite the norm.
So basically, no one wants to live in Liverpool.
No, there's a lot of stuff that live in Liverpool and love it.
Uh,
There's one guy, one of the key guys in the department, has never left Liverpool. So, um, no, I think people do, but I mean, people have other lives. The guy that runs the ICAT group, that were part sponsors of this album that I'm sharing it with you about. He lives in London, but that's because his wife is French, ironically, and but she's an author, and so she wants to be in London so she can flip over to France all the time.
right.
So they stay close to the airport. So he commutes to Liverpool. So I think everyone's little dynamic is different.
Sure. What are you teaching there?
Yeah. So that's also pretty interesting. Where I was when I was at Wits. Wits is much smaller staffing body. So it's a smaller university, and because of that, I think then you wind up teaching lots of different topics. So I was doing, a bit of theory, a bit of composition across the years. I was running classical performance studies and jazz studies at one point, and involved in that. But so you do a lot. Whereas at this university, there's a lot of staff and there's lots of courses. So because of that, it's much more specialized. So they offered me the chance to come up with my own courses. So I've launched two brand new courses. One is called Live Improvisation with Ableton, and I'll tell you about that in a second. And the second one has got the even cooler name, which is called From Hardware Hacking to Hyper Instruments. So
From
uh,
what to
from hardware hacking to hyper instruments. Yeah. So um, the first one, the improvisation with Ableton, is kind of just looking at free improv, kind of coming out of Cornelius Cardew, that kind of AMM, um, Keith Rowe, that kind of thread. But looking at that as a backdrop, but using Ableton in a kind of a networked way. So having like 10 or 12 Ableton systems all connected, and then all the musicians play live. And so there's an ability to manipulate the entire environment in a free way. So that's a new course, and it's because at Liverpool they have 3 degrees. They have a music technology degree, they have a classical performance degree, and a popular performance degree. And so this course, because the way it's structured, allows students from any one of the 3 areas to interface and work with each other where they wouldn't normally be able to.
Right, yeah, because I mean that kind of thing, the Ableton thing is crossing over everywhere. I mean, people are using it in classical music and popular music and jazz and whatever. Are they using link to link?
Yeah, yeah,
Dare I
just
say
the
it? Link up? Yeah.
yeah, completely. It's trying to keep. I mean, because that's a second year course. Trying to keep it not not too tech focused in the sense that there's like a high barrier to entry. So keeping it dead simple objects, simple plugins to use. Everyone gets the same setup. Everyone's linked the same way. That way it becomes about the creative output as opposed to making, I don't know, generic music with Ableton. So trying to get that spirit in from the start.
That sounds amazing. I mean, that sounds like we say dream job. It sounds for someone like yourself, kind of perfect.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I mean, as a lecturer or teacher in music, my biggest kick is always seeing the kids light up, seeing the students light up. So you wait for that moment always. You're like, you're just waiting for it to happen, hoping it'll happen. Get 4 weeks in, and suddenly Michael discovers, man, I've got it. I see where I'm going, and then the flames off, and then you just sit back and smile.
That's great. It's at some point I'd like to talk. I mean, we could talk a little bit about it, but I'd be curious how I mean, it sounds like you're finding the students to be really receptive and really open and really, whereas I mean, I've spoken to some other musicians who teach, and they've lamented in some cases how they find sometimes students are not very, their students are not curious musically. I mean, I guess by the nature of the kind of thing you're teaching, they'd have to be open. I mean, this was more somebody teaching at Berkeley, and they're finding their students not particularly open to learning about new musicians and different musicians and things like that. Do you run into any of that there, or?
So there's a flautist at the department, a guy called Richard Worth. He had a band that was quite big, I think, in New York called Groove Collective some years ago, like part of the acid jazz movement. Anyway, but so he's a big jazz musician, and we actually talk about this topic a lot because um, he finds that there has been this resistance, but he's arguing that say like Mono Neon and Thundercat and Louis Cole and these guys have opened doors again to an inquisitiveness, um, which which is exciting. So he's finding people are embracing theory a little bit more than they were, say, 4 or 5 years ago. Um, from my side, I mean, my theory around this, or my thinking around this, is that the a lot of the problems lie at the doorstep of the streaming services, and that's not to say necessarily in a malicious way. It's just by the nature of the machine, which is like 40,000 new songs uploaded to Spotify every day. How do you? It's like trying to say to students, you need to be inquisitive, but you're just buried. Like,
Yeah.
how do you? It must be overwhelming. Whereas, when when I was younger and when we were younger, you went digging through the CD store to find out. You got to the record guy, what's cool, or you spoke to someone, and it was different.
It is different. I mean, I'm sure I know the algorithm in Spotify, is going to lead you to other things like what you already like rather than lead you. So it's not going to help you at all.
No,
But in terms of finding things, actually, I find YouTube is much, well, it leads you to stuff you like also, but it also can kind of start shifting you a little bit. But yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and I don't want to get off on it. What I would like to do someday, if I can deal with the logistics of it, is get you and Dave Tronzo and Dave Fusinski, all the people that I know that teach,
right?
the great modern guitar players that teach, and do a roundtable, a Zoom roundtable, if we could figure out the logistics and everybody was into it, and just have you all talk to each other about this and what's going on in teaching. And I mean, it would be somewhat guitar focused, so it would work in the guitar moderne world, but I think it would be something that would be interesting to music educators all over the world at this point, because these are all factors that everybody's dealing with, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because you speak to students, and you'll find that for instance, resistance to notation is a big one, and then you speak to them in first year and they're really resistant to notation, and by the time they get to third year, suddenly they've wanted to do, I don't know, let's go back again and say the same things. They wanted to do a Thundercat tune or whatever, and suddenly they come to you for help, and the only way you can explain it is analysis, or like, okay,
Right.
so there's just this resistance at the early years that then students regret later on. So it'd be interesting to hear what other colleagues are finding across the world with that.
When it comes to notation, reading music, I have to say one thing that might be something to say to them, when they're resistant to it, is what I found with it. I mean, I read on violin. I never really read on guitar, but I read enough so that I can pick out notes,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And the thing is, one of the most thrilling things in life is to play a piece of music, hear a piece of music for the first time when you are playing it. You've never heard anybody play it. You've never heard it on a record. You start playing it, and this music is coming out of you that you've never heard before and couldn't make on your own because it's not you, it's somebody else. And I mean, to me, that is the joy of reading, being able to read. I certainly read music is it's something you're just not going to get any other way. But the first question I want to ask you is
Yeah.
what happened to Sonomorph 3? Because it's
Oh,
not
it is there. It
Spotify.
exists. It exists. It's on Bandcamp.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
that one is I only put it on Bandcamp because I didn't think it was it's an electroacoustic record. It's with a cor anglais player,
Right.
Cameron Harris, and he plays a cor anglais through Max MSP with these dozens of pitch shifting things, right? And so it comes out like these shards of pitch glass. It's quite it's an extremely heavy record. um, so I put it on Bandcamp, so it doesn't really fit the format of the regular streaming services. But yeah, it's there. It's
Okay.
there.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering because I was going back, and researching, and we talked about the Cor Anglais record, and I go to, to Spotify, and there's the trio, there's the piano, and there's no Cor Anglais. And I was thinking,
Yeah,
what?
I put it on only on Bandcamp. And what's interesting is, so there was a chap on Bandcamp who bought it, and he wrote to me and said, "Yeah, this is my favorite." He said, "This is the best record." And I thought that's really interesting. You know,
There's somebody for everything.
yeah, some enthusiast. But then
that's
you have a look at their catalog, and they're like, "Oh, okay, they're very heavy into the out there stuff." But I don't know, just say it's just experimenting with trying to place. Where do you put stuff? Some of the different streaming services have different ways of behaving, and trying to figure out how to get traction for things is really hard, but it's there.
Yeah, that's another whole thing. Well, let's talk about the new record, Inhale, which is fabulous. The first tune is called Bounce, and in fact it does, it's and which is interesting because it has this kind of math rock thing going on, but it swings in a
Yeah,
certain sort of way. I was curious. Have you ever heard this Japanese guy Cornelius?
No,
You know his stuff.
no.
He's a guitar player in Japan, and he does kind of the similar thing to that tune, where there'll be different guitars kind of bouncing back and forth between the speakers, and it's
Oh wow.
very rhythmic and it's very funky, and it's but it's also kind of math, like start stop math stuff too. Yeah, it's
Oh, you send me a link to that. I'd love to.
yeah, I will. It's great stuff. But yeah, it does swing. Was that something you were thinking about when you were doing it?
No, it's funny. I mean, I mean, obviously you're the first person to put it so clearly, which is great. But another person said to me that it's this math thing, but she said to me, no, it sounds completely African, and I guess that's the players, that's Carlo, um, because what's written on the page is doesn't indicate swing. It's da 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 da, and but Carlo goes ba ba da da ba da da. It's gonna swing, and so the band just naturally does that, Um, so well, that wasn't intentional, but I think it maybe gives it a bit of difference. It does have a sense of the global south because of the way it sings, I suppose. Swings.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny that that didn't occur to me. That I mean, you're all from South Africa, and that
Yeah.
and I know you have African influences in what you do. So, of course, it's a fine line between the interplay of African drumming and math rock. I mean, it is a part of it. It's just a question of feel. Um,
And I think,
so
I
then,
mean, oh, sorry.
no, go on.
Oh, no, I was just thinking about that because there's another tune on the record coming up for air, which I imagine to be this kind of post rocky thing initially. But when I was going into rehearsal with Jono and Carlo, I don't really specify to them. So they've got all these parts that are coming up. They may have had some scores in. I don't really tell them much other than that, and we just get into the rehearsal room and play. And I've over the years I kind of learned, one of the things I have learned is to keep my mouth shut at times, rather because when you're young, you're like, no, 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 that's not the way the drum part must go. Like, just sit back and listen. So Jono was playing this kind of West African polyrhythm thing on the tune, and I was like, okay, I never heard that, but well, we left it, and that's the way it is. So I think on bounce it's the same thing. What they come up with is what you enjoy that for what it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of the point. I mean, that's always been the point of, when you work with players. I mean, you can go one of two ways. You can either, if you have this intense vision in your head, you can make people play, and you hire people to do that. Or you can, if you hire people who have a thing, you let them do their thing.
Yeah.
If that's just another way to go. But then from the math rock, it goes into like these gorgeous romantic strings. So what's that about?
Yes. Um, thinking about this record, one of the things that I realized, over my career is like I've always, thought about format or trying to make an album or a set of works within a certain boundary. And, you know, like we were just talking about an electroacoustic record, and then like an ambient piano record, and then like contemporary jazz trio record. And and what came about with this album is the commission came from the ICAT guys, and I then decided, well, what happens if I just sit down and write stuff without any intent, just let the stuff evolve as it evolves. I was kind of inspired because there's a couple of artists I became really interested in last year that are out on the Deutsche Grammophon label, the classical label. There's an electronic artist called Clark. That was the first one I came across. He did an album last year called Playground in the Lake, and he's an electronic artist known for like kind of hard techno and stuff. I always liked his work, or loved his work. And but this album is all with string orchestra, and then in the middle of a string orchestra album, there's this other piece which is just this bare white noise, electronic pulsating, and then it goes back to orchestra. And I thought, wait, you're allowed to do that? And then I discovered Anna Meredith, who's another classical artist, but she's crossed over into electronica, and on her records it's the same. She did a thing of the Four Seasons with just glitch electronica and string orchestra, and I thought, hang on, you're allowed to do that. So that was it. We sat down for the record and thought, okay, well, this piece of material wants to be that, and that piece of material wants to be that, and then try to make it all hang together, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was going to actually wait till the end to talk about this, but but it seems more appropriate just to dive in, which is um, just the way music is going. I mean, originally, the only people that I knew that were doing that kind of thing were the Scandinavians. You know,
Right.
it started, you know, back in the days. I mean, Kittel Bjorstad, I don't know if I can pronounce his name right, but the piano player,
Yes.
you know, was going from, you know, Terry Ripdahl rocking out on one of his tunes to just these romantic, you know, piano pieces. And who was it? There's an Arnold Anderson record, I want to say, that has a woman singing Norwegian folk songs while, you know, this little known guitar player, Frode Alneas, he's a great guitar player, a Norwegian guitar player in that kind of Tardier Ripdahl tradition and that Ivan Arset thing. But he's also apparently a comedian TV personality in Norway. And so I think he got torn away from the guitar. But that is playing there with her singing Norwegian folk songs, or you know, there was one and then there's a record, or maybe that was another one where you know there's a woman singing John Donne poems with that kind of Norwegian jazz, you know, new jazz thing going on, and all that, and then Khmer, you know, Neil Spinner
Yes, of course.
Molar, groundbreaking record with new jazz and DJs, and you know, but sort of like completely the Scandinavians completely disregarded genre. What are we talking, 25 years ago, 30 years ago? But it does seem to be creeping in, and I'm wondering what you think of it, you know, if it's just an inevitable evolution, you know, of all the classical people who grew up with all sorts of music besides classical, you know, dipping their toes in the other waters, or is it the playlist mentality of, you know, there are no albums anymore, nobody listens to an album. When was the last time anybody sat down and listened to 70 minutes of music? You know, they put together a playlist of different tunes, or you know, or shuffle play or whatever. So I mean, where, you know, that's kind of my thinking of where it's going to a certain extent and why it's got there. What was your thinking?
Um, yeah, I mean, you've spoken about the Norwegians and the, you know, kind of those, that part of the ECM catalog, and I mean, that was always a huge part of my life. You know, like, you know, Khmer, like that record just blew my mind, and it's, you know, yeah, I'm there is bits of that album on this one for sure. Um, but you know, I wonder if it comes back to our, I was talking earlier about the streaming services, in the sense that, you know, it nobody listens to an album, one, but also, like, you know, people don't follow artists necessarily to have the cookie cutter repeat of things before. People fall in love, seem to be, there seems to be a growing bunch of people that fall in love with the artist for whatever they produce, just the uniqueness of it. um and I mentioned that Anna Meredith, we went to see a show of hers at the Barbican earlier in the year, and it was the most astounding thing, because you had her band, and her band's bizarre as well. She's on clarinet, Ableton, keyboards, and sings. And then she's got a cellist who sings. And then it's the hardcore electronica with a drummer beating it out, like heavy, great electric guitar player. Um, and all the bass lines are played on tuba.
I think I know her. I think, did they do a video with like a Rube Goldberg thing that went through it or something, that where, you know, where this thing, you know, just keeps, I don't know if you know the Rube Goldberg thing, where, you know, something, a thing, you know, you drop a ball and it goes down this thing and then it gets, you know, tossed across another thing, and then it goes down a chute, and then it knocks over 20 dominoes, which start another ball going.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I haven't seen that one. She did one called Paramore, which was like a train set that ran through the band.
Oh,
Bunch
that
of
maybe
bands.
that's what I'm thinking of. Yes, it's the
Yeah,
train
yeah,
set. That's right.
yeah. That's his band. So anyway, that group, right? They play the Barbican, but then they've got the London Contemporary Orchestra with them. And then they play this great show, like unbelievable, you know. And then she comes on at the end and she decides, she says, no, they've rehearsed now. Their encore. And so instead of an encore, they're going to get the whole audience to do a karaoke. So there's like the entire Barbican singing badly singing ABBA numbers with the London Contemporary Orchestra. And but I looked around and the audience was from my kids, you know, my kids were 12 and 13. And there were other kids in the audience. There were families, there were young people, there were people in their 70s. It's just this bizarre mix of humanity. So it's almost like I think with the streaming thing, you have these hyper niches of like, you know, avid Justin Bieber fans who tattoo his name on their arms and listen to everything he does. But then you also seem to have this community growing of people that are into diversity. And that's exciting, you know, and that kind of stimulated the kind of material on this record for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm doing this, you know, doing this magazine and just being interested in this thing in general. I've watched it, you know, and at some point you had to start thinking in a world where Bjork and Radiohead are superstars, there is a new, you know, there's a new interest in more challenging music out there beyond a tiny niche. And it's funny, harking back to what you were talking about earlier, the Thundercat, you know, Scary Pockets, Wolfpack crew, you know, and I what I put it down is to thousands of kids graduating music school who'll never get a job as a musician, but are now very sophisticated in terms of their musical tastes and knowledge. So there's this market now for Wolfpack to sell out Madison Square Garden to basically, you know, probably half the people there went to music school and, you know, can clap along to polyrhythms if necessary. So it's just it is a fascinating trend, and I hope you get to ride it, you know, to the end. When I heard the strings, I was trying to figure out at first, because I know you'd been dealing with synth guitar. Were you triggering them with a synth, or are they real strings? Did you have an opportunity to hire strings to do it?
Yeah, so the strings were arranged by a guy called Nick Houston, and he's a graduate of Wits. He went on and did a master's at the Film Academy of Europe, and his arranging is beautiful. And so I decided I really wanted. I've never gone as far as to have real strings, so it was the string quartet's made up of the first violin from the Johannesburg Philharmonic, the first cello. They're husband and wife team. We've known each other for years, and then another great, actually a violin player, but he played viola on this recording, Waldo Alexander, who does a lot of work with William Kentridge, the artist. Um, and then another guy, Jonathan Mayer. So it was, yeah, it was live strings.
So I'm always curious when you say you hired a string arranger. I mean, did you write? So you didn't write out the parts yourself. You just had a theme and then had somebody arrange strings for the theme that you had.
Yes. So I mean, you know, knowing it's important to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. Nick's arranging is exquisite. I mean, he's just starting out in his career. So, and he also contributed bits to the composition. So the original sketches were all mine, but then Nick added melody parts and stuff. So he's joint composition.
Oh,
We
okay.
registered jointly, and then he wrote the string parts. And then I wasn't even in Johannesburg when we were recorded. That was recorded remotely. I watched it on Zoom. So yeah.
Well, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous stuff, and it's fascinating. I mean, we've discussed it, but my next question was going to be that you seem very comfortable with jumping from, you know, math rock and noise to romanticism, serious romanticism. You know, I'm curious in your personally, where does that come from for you?
All right. Yeah, that comes from when I was growing up. You know, like my dad had a bizarre collection of vinyls, and so when I remember starting to listen to music when I was about 4, like lying on my back with a set of Rotel headphones on, you know. But there was no myopia. It would be like, you know, it'd be Genesis, and then the next thing you grab off the shelf would be Tangerine Dream, and then there was Schubert, and then there was, you know, Bach, and then there was John Denver. That's how the guitar wound up in the landscape, you know, and Vangelis, and it's just a crazy mix of stuff. So that has never changed for me. Like, you know, I'll listen to Niels Fram and then a Bill Frisell record, and then a math rock record, a battles record, then an Meredith, and so it's just an enjoyment of diversity musically. Um, one of the guys I played with for many years, he's a classical guitarist, and he only listens to classical guitar, and that was the one place where we differed. It's like I just couldn't get my head around that. Like,
No, for one thing, I mean, as I'm like you, I mean, last night I went to sleep listening to Ambrosia's greatest hits because I love those songs. I mean, and I'll go from that to listening to noise music. But I mean, for me, why I can't get my head around your friend either is basically when you come right down to it, 90% of most genres suck. And the 10% are fabulous, or they go from suck to mediocre, lousy to mediocre, but the top 10% is what's great about whatever the genre is. So if you stick with one genre, once you've gotten through that 10%, you have to start listening to stuff that's maybe not so great, and then even maybe less great, and down to stuff that, why are you even listening to this except that it's the same genre that you listen to? And
yeah,
whereas if you spread it out like we do, and a lot of people I know do, you get to cull the top 10% of everything right off the top and just listen to only the best of the best. So that's just another one of my crackpot theories, but that's made my life pleasurable, and I'm sure it's made your life pleasurable too, is that we get to listen to just the best of each genre,
I think
what
you
they
keep
do.
your own work interesting as well. I mean, like it's something I've always admired about like Bill Frisell. Having followed him for years, like it was never when a new Bill Frisell record was coming, it was never like, oh great, it's gonna sound like. It was like, okay, what's it gonna be this time? You
Right.
know, and you get Good Dog Happy Man, and then I was one of my favorite records of his is the recording he did with Chong Vu. It's mostly residual, which is just the shards of noise rock. It's like wow, that's exciting, makes for an exciting musician to follow. But knowing that the album will sound exactly the same as the previous one is always worrying. And I think that's just a natural human tendency, I guess.
Well, yeah, but I mean, people, there's the thing of people don't know what they like what they know. And some people like comfort food and some people are adventurous. I mean, we probably both know people who can't imagine eating any kind of exotic food. They like whatever their particular food is, and that's what they eat. So it's that. And as an artist, as you're saying, I mean, of course it's good for your art because the more things you draw from, and the trick with that, of course, is pulling it all in and yet still sounding like yourself and not a pastiche.
Yeah,
So
that's always
where's
hard.
the and which I mean, just for you, what do you think is the thread that goes through bounce and the string tunes, or something like bounce and the string tune?
I guess I mean it's that's this album is for me like a summing together of things in a way that if you've followed some of the other albums, there is a classical thread in the stuff, and there is like an improvisation thread in the thing. And but 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 ever since I was young, the types of classical works that I would love practicing, I had a pathos. My wife jokes about it. She says, when you make melodies, they're kind of miserable.
Well, you could say the same thing about Max Richter. That's
Yeah. I love Max Richter for that
yeah.
reason. Where it's just it's not miserable. It's like, and it's not melancholic necessarily. It's just this kind of, I don't know. Maybe Radiohead. I love Radiohead for the same reason.
Yeah.
This kind of
Well,
mournfulness occasionally. So for me, that's in all of them. Even though it's romantic, you say the string quartet. That it's not Mozartian. It's not
right, of course.
bouncy, or like maybe something that's more frivolous or whatever. It does have that kind of like introspection.
Yeah.
So even bounce, which has got a lot of energy, it's not outward looking. It's kind of an inward focused thing.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, I mean, the term I use, which I think I'm using wrong for all these years, is tristesse. The French word is called tristesse, which to me, I always thought it meant, and I'm not sure it does, a kind of pleasurable sadness.
Uh,
there's a certain pleasure you get. I mean, out of, I mean, Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings. I mean, it's the saddest, some of the saddest music in some ways ever written. But you listen to it, and it's just you get such a lift from it on a certain level as well. So, yeah,
Yeah.
and I got that from the string tracks on this record. Um, oh, well, there's a lot of. I was going to ask you how much guitar is on the record. I mean, is it all guitar, or there? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that sounds like synths and sounds like. And from going over our previous interview, I realized you do occasionally put in synthesizers and sequencers and stuff like that. But I was curious, what percentage of the record is that the ones that are not the string quartet are guitar, and how much of it is either aleatory, programs, or of synths, or something else.
Yeah, so that was a big shift for this album because everything you hear is played on the guitar. So apart from the drums and the bass and the strings, and when we do it live, the launch is on the 2nd of December, which coming up. But when we do it live, everything will be played on the guitar. So when there's a guitar synth part or when there's a synth part, it's coming off of that Robert Riley over there, which has been a game changer. And so the way it works is in Ableton, the patch changes. It switches the guitar channel off automatically when it gets that section for me, and it switches then over to a Moog sound. But I'm still playing. So everything on the record apart from the strings and that was played in. Obviously, like any record, some things were edited and tweaked and stuff. But yeah, which I think maybe that's that gives the parts a bit of a difference. The like they don't sound like synth or keyboard parts, and I think that's because they're actually played on the guitar.
Right, you're right. Um, yeah, but they don't sound like guitar either, so that's why I had to ask. Also, so are you saying, when that was going to be my next question, by the way, is how
Yeah.
you're going to do this live? So you're saying that it's basically going to be a click, that a MIDI track that changes your sounds like they do in pop music these days. I mean, somebody told me if you play for Taylor Swift, all you bring is your guitar. You plug into the Axe effects, and basically you just play the parts, and all the sounds come off the sequence of
Right.
the show. So is that essentially how it's working for you live? It's how you're going to do it live, but is that how you did it in the studio as well, or?
Yeah, so the studio. So there's been a bunch of iterations of how to do this. When we went into the studio, the I've got a Keith McMillan soft step. It's actually at my feet right now, lit up, and so there were parts laid into Ableton. And so we were playing live in the studio. All the parts were firing out of a sound card. So the engineer was recording 8 or 12 outputs out of my system, and I was playing through one of those. And um, there were sections, parts of the arrangement for the recording that were pre-programmed into the soft step, so I could jump around between them. So what we did in the studio is Carlo and John were playing, and we were bouncing off of each other, playing off of each other to get energetic parts and just recording. And then when I feel like, in a jazz sense, when I feel we've going to move to the next section, I cue it, hit the button, and it moves to the next section. So there was quite a lot of freedom in the studio, and that allowed us to, in one day, because we only had limited time when I was over on a visit, in one day we were able to capture a volume of material that we then cut down to the record to where it is. The difference with the live show then it'll be a little bit more formulated, in the sense that there are sections where there's improvisation, and we can loop those. They don't automatically fire to the next session like a pop record would, a pop
Right.
performance would. But there are sections where if we know we're only going to play the head, 16 bars, then it just fires on to the next section. So it
Right.
has the kind of, Ableton's great in that sense because you got that flexibility to have an improv element to it, but also have the rigidity, and then also load some very complex patch changes, which you wouldn't be able to do, with your feet. There's only so much. I mean, I've got a floorboard, but there's some really finesse, nuanced things that really came out great in the record. Now you can do that live, which normally you wouldn't be able to do.
Right. How do you like the soft step, by the way?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I love it. It's been fantastic. You can, because it's such a small format, and it can do really really cool things. So it has that pressure function. I don't know if you've worked with that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know. I've worked with them since the beginning.
Oh wow,
I had number three, I think, of
you're
of of,
kidding.
of the soft step at one point. Yeah, and I've worked with it all through the years. And yeah, I mean, there's things about it to love. Like I mean, the functionality of it and the size of it and the lightweight of it, and it's built. You can't destroy it, and all that stuff. There's things that were more problematic, like programming it and trying to use it on a carpet, you know, because if there's a give in the floor,
Oh, it
it's
doesn't
hard,
trigger.
yeah, it's hard to get the it can be hard to get the thing to trigger. But yeah, it works great. I mean, I know Stian Wisterhuis, right?
Yes, yes.
I mean, he used one for a long time, and then he gave it up and went back to, I think, the thing you were using, the Behringer, because he just wanted that satisfying click when he hit something. so and people, or somebody like Avi Bortnick. Do you know Avi? He
Yes,
plays
I know.
Schofield. Yeah, he uses the keyboard kind of floor, like the organ pedal version of the. It's not a soft step, but they make a floor keyboard thing that you can use to play. You can play, set up like a keyboard, and
Okay.
so if you want to kick bass with it or play bass, you can do that. But you can also trigger stuff with it.
Right.
He uses that one. No, I mean, it's brilliant. It's just a brilliant piece of kit, and it's great. Yeah, if it works out for you, then it makes life so much easier, because and
Yeah.
I did use it for a long time.
No, I've got the only thing I found is that you can't. I found it really difficult to use with shoes. So you have to. So I've been looking at getting these toe shoes you get
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I'm looking at a set of those because I think that'll solve the problem. Because if you've got shoes on, you can accidentally hit more than one button, and that can be a real disaster in my world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody's, and I think I've found that, a lot of people use it, do it with bare feet
All
or
right.
socks or something, at least, because it makes it easier. I want to get to more of the record, but
Sure.
before either one or both of us forget, what's the deal with the new guitar?
Um. Yeah, it's something I've wanted for years, or I actually watched Rob O'Reilly coming up, and um, and I think actually you emailed me to remind me something about it because there was a video that popped up by that YouTuber guitarist guy. Um, oh, anyway,
Which one?
yeah, I know. Anyway, he did a video on Rob O'Reilly, and I'd been watching it and watching it and watching it and trying to save up because it's quite a pricey piece of kit and didn't really have the money. But I saw this YouTuber did a feature and I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to blow up. So I immediately put a deposit down the next day. And thank heavens I did because the orders are backed up forever. Um,
He's not the guy that did the one for the guy in Muse, is he?
no, no, no. So, so,
No, I
so
know, I
Rob,
know. Oh, I know who. Yeah, I remember. I think I posted a video of, there was a whole bunch of guys that got together, and yeah, I vaguely remember.
yeah. So he won this thing. There's a series called Dragon's Den, which is like a business you wouldn't try and win seed money for a business. So he won that, and that got him off the ground. But he's done 3 iterations. This is the third one, and it's got a full computer inside the thing. It's got unbelievable features. It can do pitch bend in on MIDI. So the way it works is the neck is underneath the neck is a circuit board. So it looks like a normal neck. It's got ebony top, but the frets are really deep, and you see them fold in behind the ebony line, where it's attached to the other the wood on the neck, and so each fret is a circuit. So the way he gets zero latency in it, it's literally instantaneous. Is you're actually closing a circuit in the way that the old Casio DG series, those kids' toys, I've got one of those as well, used
Right.
to do. So so you play the note, and you have options. Then you can choose whether you want to pick or not. So it can it can sense the velocity from the pick, or you can just say it in tap mode, and you just play and it picks up the left hand, so you can play the thing like a piano. Um, it also it's got a joystick, it's got an XY pad on it, it's got all sorts of lovely things. Touch sensitive buttons like the soft step, but 6 of them on the guitar. And the great part about it is it sounds magnificent. I picked out the piece of wood. It's a bit of tone wood. It's like astounding, and yeah, just very, very, very happy with it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's in some ways it's like the syntax, that Holdsworth used to play. That was the first attempt at putting the circuit closing in the frets on a professional level.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize it had all of that. That's um,
Yeah, it's got, and
sounds
I
perfect.
was telling you about the pitch bend. I couldn't understand how the pitch bend works. So when the guitar was ready, I actually went across to his house. He's in Limerick in Ireland. So I went across to fetch it just because I wanted to meet the guy and see how it worked. And he was showing me the pitch bend. He got these sensors that are used in aircraft fuselage. So they're inside the fuselage and they sense tiny movements, incredibly sensitive things, obviously for safety reasons. But he's got 6 of those, and they're on the bridge piece just underneath where the saddle sits. And so they sense these micro changes in the tension, and he's then ramped up that data in the computer inside the machine. And coding's above me, but it comes down and it can sense pitch bend just by a change in tension on the string movement. Amazing, like, you know.
Yeah. Well, I can also understand now why it's so expensive.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah. I
it's
think it
like
takes
buying a
it,
high-end Mac and a high-end guitar at the same time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you can see inside it's a huge computer board, and they're all custom. He's custom designed the board as well, right from that. And he's just making them himself. He doesn't seem to be interested in franchising it. But I, it's. I was saying actually to a colleague yesterday. I was busy working with the guitar, practicing with it yesterday, and I said this guitar is fascinating because this is one of the first guitars I've ever had where I'm continually going, this is a great machine. This is great. I can't. I'm just enjoying it. Never having that moment
How
where
do
you
you
go,
power it?
say
What?
it.
How is it powered?
It's got a lithium battery in it, so it charges off USB. And he has a bunch of upgrades you can add. So I got the extra upgrade, which is like gives you 8 hours. And then I've got a little. It's got 5-pin MIDI out, and you can get a little Bluetooth transmitter. So I've just got a Bluetooth little bug plugged in the 5-pin MIDI out, and it wirelessly gets into Ableton and triggers all the synths.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did you use that on the record?
Yeah, use that on the record. It was still being made, so it's not completely on the record. I'm still using that old Casio for certain things, which makes for a mountain of editing. Because once you record MIDI off of the older MIDI systems, there's lots of gremlins. So you have to
Oh,
go
right.
clean
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, we talked about that last time. You were using filtering,
Yeah,
in Ableton to get rid of some of those stray notes.
yeah, yeah. They're very frustrating, and for live, it makes it impossible. This instrument, there's no stray notes, and you can set the threshold to where you can map it to your playing technique so that it knows you or you learn it, and so there's no false triggers coming off the thing, which is hours of your life saved.
Well, in terms of editing, yeah, post editing and post. What's playing the arpeggios and coming up for air?
Oh, at the end of it,
Yeah.
the latter. Um,
I was I couldn't tell if you were actually playing those or something you were playing or if it was programmed. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, okay, so no, it is guitar, and it's a guitar and a synth layered together. So the guitar playing both. There is a section at the end. There's these kind of like Jean-Michel Jarre arpeggios at the end.
No.
Um, those are made up of. I got my wife and my youngest son to come in and sing a note, and then cut the note and put it into a sampler in Ableton, and then took that and then programmed chords from the guitar that trigger their voices to sing in these interlaced arpeggios. it was just a fun thing to do with my son and an
Yeah.
excuse to put him on the record, you know?
And that segues perfectly into my next question, which was about using voices on the record. What led to that decision?
Oh yeah. And also yeah, to sing yourself. I don't know, there's just something about the voice, you know, which is I don't know, it's just the way we listen to music, the way we experience things. Um there's something about the intimacy of the voice, which I just on a whim, you know, thought, well, would it be okay if I sang into this? And I'm pretty appalling singer, so it took a really long time to get anything to to keep. But I do think it's worth it. There's something about the intimacy of that, you know, the track Inhale, the lead track, and also that track There's No Invasion. There's quite a lot of voice on that, and that one, that track and Special Operations, all about the Ukraine war, you know. And so I wanted that sense of threat and exoticism in There's No Invasion. So I actually sang that through did the whole thing, sang through a long toilet roll tube, screaming from the other side of the room to get that kind of far away, threatening thing. So yeah, the voice is interesting, and um, it's not something I've ever done before. But I do think it brings the material closer to the listener in some way.
Well, especially when you're doing electronic music, which can be distancing, in some ways. It's like, I mean, it's one reason I like electroacoustic music so much, when electronics are mixed with acoustic instruments, which is, I think, a field that still hasn't been explored enough, but you really get that closeness and humanity of the acoustic instruments, but you get textures with those that you haven't heard before, hopefully haven't heard before. And if they're blended properly, or blended in some way that feels natural as opposed to kind of contrived, it makes for this sum that's greater than the whole. So I can certainly see adding voices as contributing to, we've gotten to the point where electronics are getting more and more quote unquote human feeling and sounding, but still just a voice on top of that really kicks it over the edge. On the tune In the Spring, are all those parts, arpeggio type parts, picked, or are you using delays for some of that?
Uh, that on the guitar?
Yeah.
No, everything's picked on the guitar. Yeah. Um, and that tune is probably the densest tune on the record. At points, you know. Um, because I'm trying to do these. It's kind of a minimalist thing. A bunch of the compositions have got this minimalist approach where you have, like, short cells of ideas, but they're of different lengths. So you have like a five, a 5 pulse idea and a 7 pulse idea, and then a regular 4 pulse against each other. So you get this like kind of electronica repetitiveness, but this comfort that comes from things being uneven. So in the spring, it has this ascending bass line that comes, chromatic bass line, which cuts across the time, which Carlo plays live along with the synth, Um, so you get this weird tension between the repetitiveness and the non-repetitiveness.
Right. It's just, I've heard a lot of people do that kind of thing using a slapback of some sort, where you pick a note and then it comes back. So it sounds like interlocking guitars, but it's actually just, I mean, it's a delay
Oh,
being
right.
for that.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
forget
no,
you
not
actually
naturally.
trained and have the technique to be able to play it. So it's one of those things. Okay, we discussed playing it live. Oh yeah, there's some of the tunes. I mean, they're very diverse sections. That it just goes from one section that's one thing to another section that's very different, and almost like movements and things like that. What did you compose those tracks that way, or did you have these sections that you had put together and decided later, well, this could go with this and this could go with that?
No, the tracks were through composed. So, which again was also newish for me. There was, um, even the tracks. the last tracks on the album, first and second operations, I mean, I split them in the middle, just for the sake of splitting them. It really was one thing. Um, so like it would start out with a cell idea, and then although there's sections, it's a way of exploring different ways of working with that cell. We was talking about in the spring a moment ago, but it builds up to a huge point, and then there's a drop, and there's this kind of halftime post rock chordal mush thing growing. But eventually, by the end of the song, everything's back together. So these kind of cells were bits of material were designed to work together as one whole, and then sometimes passed out into an arrangement. So the original sketches would probably be very dense vertically, and then kind of spread out, rather than being separate little ideas that are put together into a work.
Right. Yeah, I was curious about that. So there's a wide variety of guitar tones on the record. I was curious. Well, you said you used the new guitar and the Casio, but there's actual, not necessarily electronic guitar sounds, but actually sounds like guitars going through pedals or effects. And I was wondering what kind of stuff you were using, what guitars, what.
Yeah. So um a lot of the original tracks were done on the Casio. It's to my left. Sorry, I'm looking at hanging on the wall there. Um, so the Casio that I was using for the Sonomorph records, and then it goes into a little Vox head. It's actually quite simple, the signal path. It goes into a Vox head. I've got a whammy that I use occasionally, and a very, very old Morley wah, which has been with me for 23 years. Same pedal. But the thing that makes the guitars sound more electronic or processed is actually having this new guitar where it's not a guitar with a effects pedal chain. It's the original guitar still there, just the Vox sound, the clean Vox sound, and then there's other layers in Ableton. So it comes into the Ableton channel, and then it just gets cloned out.
But if it sounds like, I mean, there's some stuff that sounds like a kind of rock guitar distortion a little bit. So would that be the amp distorting? I mean, it sounds, fairly natural.
Yeah, that's just a little amp head. I use Vox did those little miniature amps.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I think we talked about that. Was you'd ended up with that last time
yeah,
with the new tube technology and it.
still in
Yeah.
love with that thing.
Do you have the original pickups in the Casio?
No, 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 no. Those pickups were horrible sounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a set of
What did you replace them with ultimately?
it's a Gibson burst bucket at the back. That's what's giving it that rock and roll thing.
Right, right. Yeah, that's why it sounds so good. Um, Oh, I well then back my last question was going to be back to kind of what we discussed before, but on the soloing on second operation, there's some stuff that sounds like chicken picking almost on it, which which was led me to the thing of your kind of boundary hopping. It's just not something I expected to see. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. You're kind of like it's like muted picking with your fingers, and it's a whole style. I mean, it's a style. It's funny that it seems like you might not have been aware of it, but it's in back where I come from or came from, Nashville, we call that chicken picking. Where you get that plucking sound from muting the string and either doing it with your fingers or stuff. And it just was a lovely surprise in the middle of the solo. It's like, okay, this is going anywhere, basically.
Is that on the play out, the little play out section, or?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's where you're doing the most amount of soloing on it.
Yeah, yeah. So what happened in the studio? Uh, Jono and I, the drummer and I, when we started playing together 15 or 17 years ago, both of us were very into Uber Jam and Up All Night. Those two records, which have got this kind of Schofield does these kind of wacky, slides and hammer-ons and stuff all over the record. And I got really into it at a stage, and we were just jamming in the recording studio. So that was completely unplanned. And Jono says, "Oh, let's do Up All Night. Let's do some Up All Night at the end." And so we did, and we were just having a gas.
Well, it sounds it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it sounds great. Yeah, and I mean, Sko does some of that stuff too. You know, he'll get those little harmonics going, the pinch harmonics, but he does stuff that could be construed as chicken picking every now and then. But yeah, I mean, he's gotten to that point where he's all over the place in terms of style. I mean, I remember seeing him right after the John Abercrombie, the record he did with John Abercrombie.
yeah, I love that record.
That and you know, I saw they played together. They did like one gig in New York together to promote that record. And at that time, they didn't sound that different.
Right.
And, you know, and just over the years, it's been fascinating to watch him evolve a sound that incorporates so much more um, of, you know, the rock and blues and the techniques that are involved with, you know, that pure electric guitar thing and incorporating that into the jazz. But yeah, it was great to hear on the record because it was just, here's another thing that, you know, you got your synthesizers and computers, and you've got your straight ahead guitar, and you've got your string quartets, and now in the middle of it all, here's a little chicken picking to take you home, you know.
Yeah, no, I know that's and it was good. I mean, we did it in the studio and it was so great, and it went on a lot longer than that. It was just like that was kind of the best of it. And it was obvious by the time we finished the jam. I said to the guys, "This is going on because it has this lightness and fun about that moment."
And it fits with the rest of the record because why not? But also because that's one thing I love about your whole thing is that you are, you know, you're a player. I mean, and you combine, you know, you combine actual playing and improvising and jamming and actual, you know, that kind of thing with all the electronic stuff. And that's something that's been, you know, back to the Norwegians again. That's something that hasn't, you know, I mean, like Stian doesn't do that. I'm sure he can play, but he, you know, he restricts himself to the sounds. Whereas, you know, Ivan Arset will occasionally when I interviewed him, you know, are you familiar with the latest record, Phantasmagoria? And there's a tune that says, I bet you weren't expecting that. It's called, the tune's called, you know, and apparently, you know, they did that. And he, you know, he's blowing like crazy on that tune. And apparently he was thinking, oh, I can't put this on the record. And everybody else in the band said, you have to put that on the record. And because he can do it, I mean, he can do it. He came up playing heavy metal and jazz and all that other stuff. And it's great to hear it. And I would love to hear more people do that and do it, make it work because,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's funny. I think I might have written a column for the magazine at one point about how well the Scandinavians do it and how badly the New York jazz people did it for the most part when they tried to incorporate electronics. That it just, I mean, that wasn't terrible, but it was just, it did never felt as integrated. You know, it felt like, okay, we're jazz players and we're going to like throw some electronics into this,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, because they didn't seem to have the same background that produced the Norwegian stuff, where those guys seem truly and deeply into the electronic aspect of it as much as the playing aspect of it.
Yeah.
And if it's not honest in both areas, it's not going to, you know, it's not going to sound of a piece. And I kept hoping that somebody in New York, you know, Dave Binney experimented with it for a while. Great saxophone player, amazing alto saxophone player. I mean, he was part of a great band with Dave Gilmore
Okay.
and Adam Rogers. I can't remember,
Okay.
something Tribe, I think it was called. And that was a great sort of post fusion band, two guitars, bass, drums, and saxophone. But when it came to doing the electronics, it never really felt of a piece. And the people, you know, I mean, I heard a couple other people in New York do it, and it seemed like a worthy attempt, but you know, they just didn't have it like guys in Norway did. They said they have it together like those guys.
Do you think it's got to do with like, like certain centers, um, certain locations having certain pressures. I mean, I know in South Africa, it's there's a lot of pressure on what you're supposed to be, and that's what my experience was as a musician. Do you think it's like maybe could be that in New York, whereas the Norwegians stuff, it's the Europeans also like, there's a link between classical music and electronic music that everyone grows up with, because even in New York, like, some years back, I was following, I love this band Gut Bucket, the, is it Ty Sideman, the guitarist? Um,
I vaguely
great.
remember the name, but I don't remember what
Okay,
it.
Gut Bucket were a great band, like playing like very punk jazz, like really edgy rock and roll. Um, a couple of great records, but then you don't see it for a while, kind of around, kind of like the Johnson scene, the really kind of punk jazz thing, and then I don't know, it just doesn't hold as long. Whereas then, the Europeans and Norwegians have gotten this thing that's been going for, like you say, 25 years. Do you think
Yeah,
guys have
well,
got feel pressures to be boxed?
yeah, they also seem more open. I mean, because that was going to be the question. I was one of the questions I was going to ask you is I mean, you haven't. I don't think you've tried to break this in America, but I was wondering if your experience was, or if you thought also that Europeans seem more open to this kind of genre mixing. You know, because I mean, in America, I mean, the best and closest thing in America would be the Uber Jam band, because
Right.
Avi was totally into the electronics, and he brought that to the band big time, but it was all about rhythm and but he was into the triggering and all that kind of stuff, and they made it work pretty well. That's about the best version in America. And they did really well because they got on the jam band circuit,
Right.
and that helped them. And that probably would be actually, come to think of it, I'm trying to remember the name of the other band. There's another band on the jam band circuit that was incorporating electronic with playing, and I'm forgetting the name of it.
Okay.
They actually used to do separate kind of laptop um, concerts, and other times they would do playing. There was a guitar player, guitar, bass, and drums, and maybe keyboards, and they would do. I can't remember. There's so many bands. I can't remember. But I think I even might have even interviewed the guitar player at one point. Because they were doing it, and they were doing it pretty well.
Right.
But they didn't come out of jazz. They came out of the jam band thing. And I think in America, America might be burdened to a certain extent. It's just getting over and getting out of that burden of, jazz is playing bebop and Coltrane and all that kind of stuff. And, anything that strays too far from that is no longer jazz. And if you want to be taken seriously as a jazz player, you can't stray too far from that and all that kind of stuff. And I think, guys like Thundercat and what's his name, Kamasi Washington, are, it's a generational thing to a certain extent. People are growing up in just being exposed to everything. Jazz players being exposed to rock and electronic. I mean, that the jazz rock thing started with Schofield and that whole generation, and Bill, growing up exposed to rock. So you had all the rock and other influences brought into jazz. And
Yeah.
now you've got another generation that grew up with electronic music and dance music and some of it. So, but I think that whole thing hit Europe a lot earlier than it hit America. So that may have something to do with it.
Yeah, maybe just that kind of classical background also fit into things, because the way that the electronic music like Niels Fram and you mentioned Max Richter and stuff, there's that kind of history of electronic music interwoven with classical that's really, really interesting here.
Yeah.
um but there's also the other super interesting band for me at the moment is a band called Black Midi. I don't know if you come across them.
I know the name, but I haven't checked them out.
Blowing my mind. And as much as we were talking about the electronic music going to jazz and stuff, and we're talking about Thundercats and stuff as being these graduated musicians playing, tearing through, you know, giving a new spin on hip hop and making like crazy harmonic modal stuff hip for people to play again. Black Midi are doing something where you can hear definitely they know their John Cage and they know their Feltman and they know their They know they're avant-garde backwards, and they're playing this mad, like completely avant noise rock, like, and they're blowing up big, like big in the mainstream. But
Mm.
anyone, anyone who knows their music in any depth will realize, man, these young guys in their 20s or whatever, they know the avant noise rock scene. They know the Japanese scene that you can hear. They've immersed themselves in and reconstituted that. So, as much as the streaming we started talking about might lead to some sort of genre myopia, with people, there are other little explosions of things that say this is what happens when everyone can get everything all the time. If you invest enough time in it, you get a band like Black Midi, which is just bizarre.
Yeah, well, and it's great. So where do you hope to take this? I mean, you're doing an album release. Is there an opportunity to at least play around England with the show, or possibly in Europe for a
So at the moment, the plans for this are, we've we've put a lot of work into the album. We've printed vinyl as well, so that's available through my website. That was a choice as well, which I think is good. So we're doing the launch show, which is in Liverpool, and we're going to be video recording that. It's got live visuals by a guy from London here, Donald Swanepoel, is coming up to do those for us. And then we have a smaller show here out in Nottingham, just because it's local. And then in January of next year, so January of 23, we'll be in Johannesburg. We're going to be doing a live stream recording on get the right date here, I think 29th. It's Sunday the 20 something. Sorry, the last Sunday in January. And so that'll be online. Then our plan is to try and look for festival work for the following year using the video recordings and that material.
Oh, that's great. Speaking of video, the YouTube Love is Blindness,
Oh yeah.
that is gorgeous. That is
Yeah.
just amazing. I can see why you didn't put it on the record, because it probably wouldn't fit. I mean, if one can say that anything wouldn't fit on the record, it's just such a different tack than the rest of the record. But I'm so glad you released it, because it's stunning. It's really great.
Cool. Yeah. No. I mean, it didn't make the record because there was just like figuring out how to, do the licensing of it. I wasn't.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
That was one aspect, but also the choice to make an LP, to make a vinyl, um, also impacted a lot of the decisions. So like it had to fit within a certain time range, and Love Is Blindness took it way over
Right, right.
what was possible.
Well, it's always great talking to you. I mean, watching our first video, I realized how much fun we were having. I'm glad we got to do it again. And now that I'm on this side of the pond, who knows? We'll meet up in London or something in person at some point.
Yeah, hopefully
Or you'll
get.
be doing a festival in France, and
Yeah, yeah, that's the hope. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
see you. That would be great. All right.